Hey listeners, it's Andrea. Today, we test the limits of how far off topic we can go. Data once again charms a very confused woman, and we ask the question, would you want to be a colonist on a new planet? Come nerd out with us.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Today, we're talking Season 5, Episode 4, Silicon Avatar. This amazing episode was written by Lawrence V. Conley and directed by Cliff Bull. The Enterprise gives chase to the crystalline entity after it destroys a Federation colony. A xenologist, who has motivations of her own with respect to the crystalline entity, is assigned to the Enterprise to assist in the investigations. Bum, bum, bum.
Xenologist?
Xenologist.
That is a cool word.
Yes. Well, xeno means other or alien. So somebody who studies alien life forms, I guess that would be the appropriate nomenclature for a person who, when we start contacting aliens, apparently that will be a job title.
That works for me. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That tracks.
Yeah. Right.
Totally
the nomenclature checks out. Right. And that's not something you hear on every podcast. I gotta be honest.
No, you don't. Only the quality ones like ours.
Only the super nerdy ones. Yeah. What are your initial thoughts on this episode, Shereese?
I really like it. I mean, obviously it's a data heavy episode, so it's one of the episodes I've visited many times. I haven't seen it recently, but I have a lot of fond memories of this one just because I remembered that it was this mix of grief and vengeance. Yeah. And the mother was kind of mixing those together and calling it justice. And I think that that is something that is very human. And it's something that I personally struggle with a lot, like the idea of what is justice, because a lot of times to me, justice feels like revenge. And I'm not going to lie, revenge feels pretty good. So I'm kind of like, well, what is justice then? Like, does that feel like anything? I don't know. Yeah. And so I really appreciate this episode for that reason, to answer that really big question. I mean, not to really answer it, but I guess to ask it and to cause me to think about it again. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What were your initial thoughts?
I just, you know what? My thoughts were not really as deep as yours. I was just like, cool, the crystalline entity is back. Like, I remember really enjoying this episode, but I really only remember the very beginning, where you've got this very utopic planet that gets wiped away, and then they hide in the cave, and then the very ending with, what Dr. Marr does. And it's like, oh, there's all this stuff in the middle I'd completely forgotten. I really, really loved the crystalline entity. It's an alien that was first introduced, I'm pretty sure, in season 1, maybe season 2.
I think it was season one. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's when we met Lore. Right. Mm-hmm. And so this is like a callback to season 1. And I'm glad that we get to revisit, because the last time we saw the crystalline entity, Lore was spinning off into space and the crystalline entity was just bouncing. It was like, just getting smaller and smaller. But now we get a where are they now?
Mm-hmm. Which we so rarely get on the show.
Yes, we do. And actually, I did some reading about this episode. This is a very cool episode because they were like, we loved the crystalline entity as an alien. We loved that it was a non-carbon life form. We loved that it was a non-humanoid life form. It was just so different and so cool. And we wanted to bring that back to kind of close out that story. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. The question I have is this the same crystalline entity that we saw in season 1, or are there a species of them and it's just a different one, but they all look the same because it's a snowflake, you know?
They did answer that in this episode. And I had the same question. I was like, oh,
did they answer this?
They did. It is the same exact one.
So it's only one of one limited edition?
Who knows? Because there still might be others that we just haven't encountered. This may be the one in the Alpha Quadrant. This may be the one closest to, Starfleet colonies or something.
Yeah.
Because I have a hard time, if it's a life form of any kind, there's got to be more than one. Now, it could be the last one of its species. It could be, it's far away from the others. It could be the kind of animals that live very isolated lives, right? Where they only bump into each other every couple of years kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we don't get the answers to any of those questions. We do find out it's the same crystalline entity, but we don't find out about the rest of the entities which in and of itself is fascinating as well, because that is something we see on the show. A lot of times they will meet alien life forms that they only meet once. And I think it was Picard who said about one of the planets they went to, sometimes first contact is last contact. And this is like a second contact or whatever for the Enterprise specifically, but we don't see them again unless they come back in the next season of Lower Decks or something. We don't see them again.
Which would be amazing, but
amazing. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love Lower Decks.
All right, let's just jump right into this. So Riker and a away team are helping colonists on this planet Melona 4, which is like very paradisey looking. They are setting up a new colony, and one of the leads, Carmen, she's flirting exceptionally well with Riker. They have such great like rat-a-tat back and forth when they flirt. I really wish that she wouldn't have died like 1 minute
instantly
after this.
Yeah. Want to see what came of that.
I would like to see what happens. Although I guess we all know what happens. He's going to wash her feet and she's going to storm back to the colony 25 minutes later, angry. But
and go on with her life.
Actually, can I just say, I have my 2 nephews who are visiting with me, and they stay with me all summer. And the youngest is 7. And he was like, "What are you watching?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm watching Star Trek." Because, me and Shereese have this podcast, so I need to watch the episodes and then take notes. He was like, "Oh, can I watch with you?" I was like, "Sure." He'd never seen Star Trek, and especially not TNG. So he was like, "Who's that? What's that?" And I was like, "Oh, that's Data. He's an android. That's like a fancy word for a robot. He's really cool. Oh, that's Geordi. That thing on his eyes is like a visor because he's blind. That's a Klingon. That's Worf. Like he's a security guy." Like I was naming all these cool aliens. And I was like, "That's Troy. She doesn't look like an alien, but she's a Beta Z. She can like sense your feelings and kind of read your mind." And that's Riker. He's good looking. I was like, I had like tall. All of this. I was like, this is the captain and that's Riker. He's just a really good looking dude, I guess.
Hey, there could be worse descriptions in the world.
This is true. But I felt like I shortchanged him a little bit.
He's very tall. He stands in very creative ways. He is often on ships just before they blow up.
The 7-year-old nephew was like, "What does he do?" I was like,
"Everyone
looks steely."
He's only 7. We're gonna save that conversation.
Yeah,
for later.
We were gonna save that for later. Yeah. But he did watch this episode with me, and he was like, he stuck with me the whole time. He was like, "This is so cool. What's going on?" Like, and I just remember thinking I was exactly his age when I started watching Star Trek. Because at first I was like, "Oh, these concepts are like too adult for him, or like too hard for a 7-year-old to understand." But then I was like, "Wait, no, I was this age too." Like when you watch an adult show as a kid, you don't get all the nuances, but you get a lot, right? Yes. And you perceive it in your 7-year-old brain or your 9-year-old brain or whatever age you are. So he was like wide-eyed. He loved it. He was like, "Can we watch more of those movies?" And I was like, "It's a TV show. Yeah, there's a lot. We can watch more." So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Oh, and the next generation is introduced to this epic show. I love that.
Yes, I was really feeling very full circle.
So I had a question for you about specifically this scene, as you're talking about watching with your nephew. My first thought when I saw this opening scene was, "Ooh, terraformers." Now, terraformers haven't had a lot of good luck so far in the show.
Nope.
But I was very hopeful in the first 30 seconds. Maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe it'll work for us. But it didn't.
It sure didn't.
However,
it didn't.
It didn't. But however, I was thinking like, I really appreciate in this episode and that other one with the living sand where they were trying to terraform. I really appreciate the spirit of terraformers. Yeah. The stupid name. Yeah. The microbrain. I really appreciate the spirit of the terraformers. They're like just these adventurous people. Right. And I love what Carmen said to Riker, where she was like, yes, it's exciting and it's fun finding a new planet, but really it's making it a home. That's the real joy, which is like a whole nother layer to it, right? It's exploring and then it's like creating something. Roots. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you specifically, if you were in this world, if you were in the Federation, maybe not serving as an officer necessarily, but would you be the kind of person who's a terraformer? Would you be a terraformer?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes. And here's
Mm.
why. Because I would want to spend years aboard the Enterprise, exploring different systems and stuff like that. But after a while, I think it would start to feel very transient.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to put down roots somewhere. And Melona 4 was absolutely gorgeous. And actually, any Star Trek super fans who are based in Southern California, like we are, can go check that out. That was filmed at the Golden Oak Ranch in Santa Clarita. And it's lots and lots of greenery like that. But there's also like old Western towns that are sets. So people like, you know, companies will rent to like film there and whatnot. But like where they chose to film was so gorgeous. Because if it was a planet like that, yeah, I think I would want to put down
if it
roots.
was Vagra 2, you might pass on that.
Yeah, I'd be like, you know, this is looking awfully Marsy. Like, and then we've got that oil slick that just can't be cleaned. Like, no amount of kitty litter is cleaning that up.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. I think it would. Yeah, I think it would. I think it would depend on the planet. Like, if it's Risa, probably. You know, if it's Vagra 2, not so much.
Got it.
But yeah, what about you?
I don't know. I've been asking myself that question, and I kind of feel like no. I don't think so. I just looking at my own home, the only reason I have paintings up on my walls is because I started painting. Okay. Otherwise there's nothing on my walls. There never has been. There probably never would be. Like, I'm just not
you're a very Spartan person.
Yeah. And I'm not while I while I am a homebody, I don't think I love the idea of going to a place that is uninhabited by man and turning it into some place that's habitable by man. I am a city girl. I like Starbucks. I like high rises. I like bay windows. So I think I'm the kind of person who would just move to a place that's already all done and just enjoy,
like once I finished all my work.
Yes. Like I would go to Risa and hang out, like just be someplace beautiful and done and ready for people. I don't think I'm the pioneer type. I don't. I think I'm the settler type. I'm the type to come along after y'all have got it all together.
In another life, I swear I was Dr. Quinn medicine woman. Okay. Like that's the kind of shit like that. When I see people, like I scroll around on Reddit at night before I go to bed, like it's just a good place to kind of like see what's around. And I didn't realize there's a thread called like homesteading or something. And people will post pictures of like their little chicken farm or their whatever, or sometimes like problems, or they're like, hey, found this snake on my farm. Can anybody identify this or something, right? Where it's a little bit of like an open source forum for people to pitch in ideas and whatnot. And I was like, that is so cool, because I often thought if I had enough land, I would want to like raise my own fruits and vegetables. I would want to have chickens. Like I had chickens when I was very little. My parents had chickens and I loved it. And actually my neighbors 3 doors down have chickens, which I just discovered. And they bring me like freshly laid eggs like once a week. And it's just the most wonderful thing. And it makes me so happy. Like this is back to like the Darmok episode where you're like, don't go off the trail. And I'm like, who
needs a trail? Stuff. Trail schmail.
Yeah. I'm like burning the trail behind me. Cause I'm like, we don't need no stinking trail.
And I'm not even going to that planet. Cause there's like electricity monsters there. No,
there's a predator stegosaurus electricity monster on that planet. We are good.
Yeah, I thought I would not homestead there. So yeah, you'd pick your planets carefully, but I did think of you as a terraformer.
Well, you know where, like as a real world example where I would never go to try to live is Australia, because everything is designed to kill you there. Literally everything is just designed to kill. I'm like, I'll stick to SoCal where I can like drive home.
You know, it's so funny you mentioned that
for a week.
It's so funny you mentioned that because like the majority of our listeners are in Australia. So hang in there, guys.
Oh my God. Australia, what is going on with you guys?
I don't know. They do have the most deadliest creatures in the world are in Australia. So I don't know how you guys are surviving long enough to listen to our episodes.
In the tri-sector area, they've got the most dangerous animals.
Yes. We appreciate you. We are amazed by your fortitude.
I don't know. I saw a picture once. Again, it was on Reddit and it was like under subreddit Australia. And it was a picture of like, it was a person who was like walking through a park early one morning and there was all this frost everywhere, like in the trees, on the tables, on the grass, on the path. And this person wrote, this isn't frost, it's spider season. And these are webs.
Oh my gosh. That story just got so horrible so quickly.
Yeah, it looked like frost everywhere. Like everywhere you look, there were webs. I was like, Oh my, activate jetpack and levitate your ass out of there. Like, don't touch anything.
That would be my last day in Australia. I'd be like, okay, good knowing you. Hello, boss. I quit. Landlord, I'm out. I'll send you my check once I get back to the States because I can't. The spiders own everything and they can have it.
Yep.
Like, I can't.
Yep.
Mm-mm.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Moving back to the terraformers, because that was chilling.
I will say I've had 2 Australian roommates and they were the most lovely. Australians are just the most fun and lovely, easygoing, chill, down to earth, ready to party people I've ever met. And I just think they're like lovely. But the spiders, y'all can have that. You can have it. It's okay. It's okay.
So going back to the show. Yeah.
We're off topic by a lot. Just
a little bit. And going back to the show. Okay. So I'm loving the Carmen Riker, like little sizzle chemistry between them. And and then they hear this weird sound, Data can identify it. And we see the crystalline entity coming down from orbit right above this one colony on the whole freaking planet. It's zeroed in on this one colony because they are terraforming. So it's only people there.
But yeah, I probably found the place where there's like the most potential nutrients and it's the people.
Yeah, exactly. Something, because it also eats all the trees and the bacteria and everything.
Yeah,
but like, that makes sense to me. What I loved about this scene was how the crystalline entity blocked the sun, but made everything blue because the sun was filtering through its like blue light. I was like, that is a sweet touch. It's kind of like,
wasn't that cool?
Yeah. It's like whenever we see the Borg and everything's green, it's kind of like reminding me of that with how this crystalline entity comes and everything's blue. I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh snap, this is not good. Very, very bad. And what drove me crazy was when Will is like, turns to Carmen and is like, gather everyone. We've seen this before. And she's like, what is it? And he's like, I don't have time to explain. Let's go. And I'm like, all the words you just used, you should have just said run. We didn't need all those words. Everybody run. Like, follow Data. Like, that's what I was thinking. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this drives me crazy when people say all the stuff that they don't need to say. Like, I don't have time to explain this to you right now, but I will explain this to you in full. By this time, we're already dead, man. Come on.
That does kill me. They're like, there isn't any time to explain this. If I had time to explain it, I would tell you about it, but we don't have time. At current, we're really running it. It's like, the time
it took to explain that you don't have time.
Yeah. Oof. There was no time. So they end up running and an old man falls down and Carmen runs back to save him or try to get him up off the ground and both of them get completely wiped out by the crystalline entity's like suction beam. That it's like this, the way that they did this in special effects was so great. So like cool. A white light and then it's just a perfectly lined like patch of just dirt. Like there isn't anything left. I thought it was really well done.
It was amazing because you could see the contrast in that scene where Carmen and the old man were incinerated or whatever. You could you could see the green patch next to the brown patch. It's just like everything is just like dissolving. It's just gone.
Yes.
And it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
It's totally terrifying.
This whole scenario is terrifying. And then running into a cave and then sealing off the cave because I was also thinking, can the entity come into the cave? Isn't it too big? Or like, can it break off little pieces of itself and get in there? I don't know.
Well, remember Data did say like there's this like refractory like material in the rock that might save something. And so they go into these underground caves and we have 2 new phaser settings, by the way, rockfall and lamp.
Yeah. Did you notice we haven't seen rockfall before?
No, I don't think we've seen rockfall before. And I'm pretty sure we haven't seen lamp because they have
lamp. That was a new one. That for sure was a new one. I wrote that down. I was like, oh, hey.
Yeah, you can turn on lights now. Yeah, because we have seen where they use it to like warm the rocks to like stay warm, which should give off some light if you heat it up enough, like a metal that glows. I don't know. But yeah, they had rockfall and they had lamp. And I was like, cool. All right.
We need to get some phasers, girl. This is like so much better than the Swiss Army knife.
They do everything. They've got 5,500 settings. Yeah. Now they have to wait it out in the cave for a long time, and air is starting to run out. And
that was my first thought when they sealed the cave. Well, actually, my first thought was, can the entity get in the cave because it made it a lot easier for it to eat you? But then after they sealed it, my second first thought was, now you're going to suffocate to death. And I just thought this whole scenario from start to finish is terrifying. Being the colonists running for your lives, seeing things get devoured, being trapped in a cave, not having oxygen.
If you are not claustrophobic now, You will be forever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did catch something, and you're so right about this, because Beverly, thank God there's a doctor on the team, because she was like, let's just hope that we don't run out of air. And Riker's like, there's got to be some sort of air funnel somewhere. And I was like, has there got to be? Why does there have to be?
False.
Like, why are you just assuming
this could just be a hole in a rock?
Yes.
It doesn't go anywhere else to the other side of the rock.
There's got to be something good. Is there? It doesn't seem like there's any. You're just really wishful thinking our way out of this.
And he was just like, everyone sit still and don't move and like try not to breathe. And I thought that was genius, because I actually wouldn't have thought of that. I did think about air running out, but I didn't think about the best way to conserve air with a group of people trapped in a cave. And that was genius. And I totally filed that away if I'm ever in this unfortunate situation. Yeah. And I also thought, it reminded me of that episode. I don't remember the name. Maybe you do, but the one with, was it like the final mission or something like that? The one with Wesley, his last episode. Yeah. Where they were trapped on that planet. Yeah. And I just thought, again, like, this is my worst nightmare, this scenario. Like, what if you're in this cave and someone starts freaking out and running around screaming because they're afraid to die, and now they're using up everyone's air? Like,
no, what you have to do right in that moment is you have to knock them
on the head. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to knock them unconscious immediately, because you run the risk of injuring them and they could die, or they're going to take everybody's air and everybody's going to die. So I need you to, Terrible. I actually was talking to a family friend who's a psychologist, and I was like, have you ever had patients, because she has worked in mental hospitals, and I was like, have you ever had patients like absolutely lose it on you and go completely crazy? She's like, yeah. And when it gets bad enough and gets like where they can hurt you or themselves, you have to slap them hard across the face. Like, you have to stop them. Mm-hmm. Right. Like that kind of brings everything to a dead stop. And usually they'll be like, what, and then you can be like, stop, and I was like, Jesus, how many times have you had to do that? She's like, once, I think, in like 20 years or whatever. And I was like, cool. Okay. Thank God. Also, thank God you're doing that job, because that's not it for me right there. Yeah. So now finally, as air is starting to run out and they're like, we might have to blast our way out here. They start hearing like some rumblings and cracklings behind the rock fall that they used to seal themselves in. And I love that Data and Riker are pointing phasers. I was like, what are you going to do to the crystalline entity if it comes to that thing? They're going to
go down swinging. That's what they're going to do.
In a blaze of glory, apparently.
They're going to die with the phaser in their hand, which I feel like is appropriate.
Yeah, that's true. They're
not going to do anything, but they're just not going to sit there and just be eaten. Also.
Yes, so that's true. That's true. Now, as it turns out, it's not the crystalline entity. It's Worf and the security team who've made it to the cave and liberated them. Bum-ba-da. Thank God. And the crystalline entity has completely destroyed all life on the planet. And first of all, that visual, when you had that lush planet, and then it was like this like mountain range of just like dug out debris or whatever.
Basically, I was like, just looked like Mars.
It did look like Mars.
Everywhere. And it was like so heartbreaking.
My first thought was, Geordi is now officially the smallest living being on this planet. That was my first thought.
Why Geordi? They had kids on that planet.
He was the shortest one, I think, out of the whole group, wasn't he? Geordi is the smallest living thing on this entire planet. And Worf is the largest living thing on this planet. It's not a lot of range, I gotta be honest. But yeah, the planet is completely destroyed. And we're gonna have to skip ahead a bit, because this is gonna be like a 4-hour long episode. But they bring aboard Dr. Kyla Marr to study what happened with the crystalline entity. And she is immediately irritated by Data. She doesn't want to work with him because, as we find out, her son died on the attack on Omicron Theta, which was the original planet that the crystalline entity destroyed. And if you remember, like, Data was found on that stone plinth, and that's where Data and Lore came from. We do know from season 1 that Lore
called the entity somehow.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Lured the entity there to destroy the colonists, because he was very petty and jealous.
He's super petty and jealous.
And now everyone knows this. This is common knowledge now that Lore was behind it.
Yes. And if I recall correctly, and it should have been obvious, that episode is entitled Data Lore.
Yes. You do recall.
I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, that was a given. And so she suspects that Data lured the entity to Melona 4 the same way that Lore lured the entity to Omicron Theta. And she's like, I think that the crystalline entity only spared your team because you were part of the group and it's not going to destroy its ally. Like, why would it spare you? Which I got to say, from her point of view, that's a very like reasonable thing to suspect, especially given the fact that there have never been any survivors from the crystalline entity attacks, like none at all. And there's one group that survives and it happens to have Data, who's the brother of the man who lured it. Like, I would be feeling pretty suspicious myself, to be honest.
Yeah, I would feel probably more suspicious if Data was like on the Enterprise when it came to the planet versus Data putting himself in harm's way with all the colonists, unless he's that sick of a mind that he wants to be there to see everybody die. But then why would he also be a part of saving everyone's lives? I don't know. So there are some loopholes, but looking through the lens of vengeance and justice and anger, absolutely. Everything she thought makes complete sense.
Right.
And I like that Picard was having none of it. When she was just like, I would prefer not to work with Data. And Picard was just like, that's nice. You can add more people to your team if you want, but Data is the foremost expert and you will work with him at the very least. I just love that Picard is just, he's always on the side of his people. Like we had the same thing with Worf during his discommendation days for like a whole season. Every time a Klingon came on board, they were like, I don't want to work with Worf. And Picard was like, tough, you're working with Worf.
Yeah.
I just appreciate the way he stands behind his people. And even when Troy called him on it and was like, she still has some hurt feelings. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. He was just like, look, if her feelings are getting in the way of her doing her job, I need to know right now. And that's what makes Picard an amazing leader.
Yeah, I think that was like really wonderful because I think it was great of Troy to be like, maybe you shouldn't have forced them together so soon. But I love how he answered that. Yeah, he was like, if she's not going to be a team player, it's best to know now. It's like dating advice. If somebody's going to be a dick, better to find out sooner rather than later. Yep. So, because then you can make some informed decisions without emotional attachments clouding your judgment or whatever. Right. So like, it's better for this investigation not to go on for like 3.5 weeks, only to have her recused from like the investigation 3 weeks in. Like that's we don't have time for that. Now, after conducting some experiments in main engineering, Dr. Mars starts to warm a little to Data, especially after she learns that he's programmed with many experiences of the colonists from Omicron Theta, including those of her son, Rennie, who died when he was 16 in the crystalline entity attack, which is just so sad. It's so sad and it's so young.
Yeah. And we discovered this is what set her on her path to become the expert she is today. This is why she is the foremost expert on the crystalline entity, is because she was always a scientist. She was always an accomplished scientist. Yeah. The death of her son turned her ambitions to knowing everything she could about this one entity. And we learn it was to learn everything about it so that she could destroy it. She didn't really want to know anything about it. She just wanted revenge. And she was willing to dedicate her entire life to that end, which is, again, superhuman. It's very human.
It's superhuman, right? Like it's such a human instinct, especially as like the mother of a slain child. Like, as a scientist, like she would understand that killing this entity would not bring Rennie back, but it avenges like his death, even though his death wasn't a murder. And she does have this exactly. She has this like back and forth with Picard because she realizes that Picard has no plans to destroy the crystalline entity, right? Or it's his last resort, which is so Picard. Yes, and like instead he's like, no, we're not hunters. I'm here to communicate with it. And it has as much right to live as we do. And like, it's not another killing. Good line. Yeah. Yes.
It's not killing. It's feeding.
It's feeding. It's not murdering. It's feeding. And if maybe we could determine its needs, perhaps we can find a different source of food other than destroying planets and people. Yeah. And like, whatever, it's not targeting people. It's just targeting planets. It's like the Borg, but instead of taking all that energy to assimilate, it's just feeding itself. It's like me going through a bag of like Doritos. Like I'm just eating. It's not anything personal against the Doritos.
Or as Picard says, it's the whale with the cuttlefish. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't feel great for the cuttlefish, but the whale's not murdering cuttlefish. It's just eating. And I thought to myself as he was talking, first of all, this was a really great speech. This is a great speech as a captain. This is a great speech as a scientist. And it's true that, most of nature kills to eat. Very few animals in nature, man is included, kill for sport or for protection of their property or their land or their mate. Yeah. Most don't even kill for mates. Most just like harm and maim. But one of the things that I appreciate about what he was saying was he never tried to communicate, or as far as I know, they never tried to communicate with the Borg. The Borg were just destructive and scary and awful, and they just tried to run or fight if they had to. But there was really no way, there was no back and forth, because the Borg were just like, you will be assimilated. Like, resistance is futile. There was no communication back and forth. However, that was not the approach he took with the crystalline entity. And I'm really curious as to why that is, why he didn't view them exactly as the Borg. But I'm glad he didn't, because I think...
Well, because it wasn't turning... I mean, it's very... To me...
You see what I mean? Like, they're both kind of mindless...
mindless, like, destroyers of worlds.
Yes.
But the Borg have a mission to assimilate people against their will, and the crystalline entity is just eating. And Picard did try to communicate with the Borg, but that failed almost immediately. And then I just went to, like, run away.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, no, I mean, I
fair.
understand completely where Picard is coming from, because I was thinking about this in terms of, like, what if we are the crystalline entity and cows are, like, coming together to, like, fight us, right? Where they're like, stop killing and eating us. And I'm like, but I just wanted a burger. Like, it's not, and like that I kind of looked at it as like, what if we were the ones, being targeted as, like, murderers, which, like, humans do kill a lot of things, like, for food, right? And it's not personal. It's just eating. It's just food, right? It's a food source. We're just feeding. So I understand completely, like, why Picard wouldn't want to destroy it. Like, this is a very, like, singular and like exquisite and different life form, unlike anything we've ever encountered before. We owe it to ourselves and to the life form to try to communicate and establish some sort of link where, like, we could maybe meet its needs or fabricate some sort of chemical, synthesize something for it or something. I don't know. So, like,
that'd be cool.
Living, right? Like, I was thinking, what
without
if you took it
everyone.
To, like, what if you found, like, a star that, like, a dying star that it could feed off of energy wise for, like, a millennia, and it doesn't have to, like, kill planets or whatever. I don't know. But she is not having it, Shereese.
And I see where she's coming from too.
Dare you?
Yeah, she's like, it's killed hundreds of thousands of people. And as far as we know at this point, there have been 11 recorded attacks of the crystalline entity. And this is the only group that's ever known to survive. These group of, and almost all of them did, except for Carmen and the poor gentleman she was trying to help. Yeah. However, like, so I see where she's coming from too, that it has destroyed whole planets. It's just left whole planets
track record. Yeah.
So I understand why she's angry and why she's scared and why one would be scared and why one would say this is just destructive and we need to get rid of it, which Riker brings up later on privately with Picard. Like, I'm not so sure about this chit-chatting plan. Like, I think we should just blow it up. I'm going to take a page from Worf's book and just say, shoot it. Let's just shoot it. Yeah. And I appreciate that Picard actually listens. He hears what they're saying and he's still holding the line of, like, yeah, but it has a right to survive and I am prepared to kill it if necessary. But I want that to be our last resort, not our first resort.
Last resort only. Now, this sort of feeling with Riker and Dr. Mara is kind of cemented when a ship called the Callisto sends out a distress signal that
another great name.
Callisto, being pursued by the crystalline entity, and they do not survive the attack. What's interesting is the ship is perfectly intact. It's just nothing living left aboard.
Just like the planets.
Yes.
It's like nothing living. Somehow it, like, absorbs the living things.
Yes. Well, which I'm curious, because if Melona 4 had, like, some buildings, would those buildings still be there? Because I feel like the landscape was totally wiped out, right?
Yeah, but the landscape was all trees and bushes. So I don't know.
You're right.
I don't know.
You're right.
I don't know, because we also had that episode where we thought it was the crystalline entity, but it was really the Romulans, that the Neutral Zone episode in season 1, where the whole land had been scooped out, like an ice cream scooper had come and, like, scooped it, and the like colony was gone, and we were kind of like, wait, did the crystalline entity take the buildings or does it not take the buildings? I don't think we ever get an answer to that question. But according to what happened with the ship, we should still see a ghost town. Like, the town should be exactly the same. The cities should be exactly the same. But all the bushes and potted plants and trees, the parks,
everything. All of that. Well, we hear the poor aliens aboard the Callisto being wiped out, and Dr. Mara is so disturbed by this. And she talks to Data later in the turbo lift, and she's like, I remember hearing that during wartime when soldiers are dying, like, as they lay dying, they often, like, cry out for their mothers at the end. And she's like, I wonder if Rennie did the same for me. And, like, she ends up working with Data to fine tune their instruments, and she actually asks Data to play back some of his journal entries. in Rennie's voice. And Data does. And Dr. Marr is just gut wrenched, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like her heart is just being ripped out of her to hear her son's voice, especially learning like there was a girl in his life that he was really into and all this stuff. And I think at this point, this is where your personal feelings are overwhelming your ability to do your job. And like, you probably need to step away. Like she's sliding really, really quickly into
there's
this,
no
like,
way she's going to step away though. Yeah, I agree.
No,
then there's no way she's going to step away. There's no way. She's devoted her whole life. They would have to tie her down and like put force fields around her body to keep her out of it at this point, at any point really, but especially the closer she gets to where they are now. So we discover a couple of things. Data figures out how to follow the trail of the crystalline entity. So they pick up some antimatter particles that are being emitted just by the crystalline entity, so they can follow it through space. They know where it's going. It's heading towards some inhabited planets. So they're trying to kind of cut it off before it gets there. We also learn that Dr. Marr herself was an accomplished scientist back when her son was on Omicron Theta, and she left him there with some family friends to be raised while she kind of went off and did things for her career. And she kept saying like, oh, every year I'm going to go back and get him. I'm going to go back and get him. And then she said one day there was no more years, right? Because of the attack and her son had died. So she had spent all this time thinking that maybe her son was mad at her or felt abandoned. She had just been feeling really guilty for all these years. That she's a terrible mother. Yeah. So part of her request to Data was, what did my son think of me? Did he feel mad at me or upset at me for leaving him? And Data was able to... Did he
feel abandoned?
Yeah. Data was able to reassure her, from all the journal entries that I have from him, he was proud. He was proud of you. He was proud that you were living your dreams, and he was proud to be your son. And I thought that was a really beautiful piece of closure that not a lot of parents get about how their kids really feel about them, and vice versa. Not a lot of kids get about how their parents really feel about them. We don't always open up until it's too late. And sometimes it's too late and we don't get that chance. Right. Yeah, so I just thought, I thought that was a really beautiful sense of closure that she could have gotten from Data, but that wasn't enough for her. She still needed revenge.
She still needed it. And they do end up finding the crystalline entity, and the crystalline entity comes zooming up to the Enterprise, and they begin sending this like fluctuating particle pattern. And the crystalline entity starts responding and sending its own pattern of like particles or waves, like an energy pattern. And they're like, oh my God, when there's a pattern, that means it's like communicating in some way. It might take years to figure out what
it's saying, but clearly it wants to talk.
Like, yes, it wants to talk. Like, it's sentient, which is incredible. And Dr. Marr is like, it's beautiful.
Which it is.
Yes, she's like, it's beautiful, which it really is. And she's totally like struck by this. And this is the one moment in the episode where it feels like hopeful, right? Yeah. Where it's like, it's communicating back. We're breaking through. Dr. Marr thinks it's beautiful. Like, there might be hope after all. Oh my God.
And really, who's ever seen the crystalline entity besides the Enterprise to know what it looks like at all and to describe it? So maybe she's never even seen it or didn't know exactly, and maybe pictured it as some creepy monster, which I would if it's something that killed my child and killed the whole colony and killed 11 planets. Yeah, I would think of it as an ugly monster, not a beautiful snowflake in space.
Like this crystal structure. Yeah. But alas, it is not enough to stay her hand. And she pushes a button, and suddenly the particle beam starts coming through, like, instead of like, consistent little like beeps, it's like a constant wave. And the crystalline entity immediately like backs away and stops transmitting. And Troy is like, it doesn't like it. It doesn't like it. And Picard is going, Dr. Marr, stop the beam. Dr. Marr, stop the beam. Dr. Marr, stop the beam. And I'm like, why is it taking so long for you guys to be like, Data, stop this, right? Or like, Worf, disable whatever she's doing, or something. Like, I mean, they literally went on for like 15 fucking hours before they're like, Data, try to stop it. And I was like, what?
And then it was like, she's locked out all the codes. And you're like, well, if we would have said this a little bit earlier, Data, stop her, he would have probably had enough seconds to figure out the code. I mean, it's Data. So for some reason, Geordi's like, I can figure it out, but it's going to take me some hours. Why can't Data just do it faster? Didn't he just see her? What she did?
Yeah.
Can he just undo what he saw her did?
Like, they ran out of time because they spent like 5 minutes being awestruck by the beauty of the crystalline entity, going, Dr. Marr, stop it. Dr. Marr, Dr. Marr, you might want to stop it now. It's like, okay, listen, this thing is starting to vibrate out of control. Like, Data, do
Shut
something.
It down. Yeah.
Right? Shut it down. Do something. Pull the plug. I don't know what to tell you. I'm really disappointed that it took so long, although I guess it may not have made that much of a difference because she did like create like a single lockout code. And the poor crystalline entity ends up shaking out of control. And she goes, I did it for you, Rennie.
Yeah, it shatters
Super
into
creepy.
A million pieces.
Well, no, while this thing is vibrating out of control, she grabs Data's sleeve and she's like, it's for you, Rennie, for you, which I thought, lady, you've lost your entire grip of reality. Like this man is programmed with your son's journal entries, but he's gone, honey.
Yeah.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Okay. Talking to Data like he's your son, you fucking lost it. You've lost your grip on reality.
We should have never had Data repeat your son's journals in his voice. Like that request of, can you make it sound exactly like my son? I know you have that capability. That was a bad call.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, doctor, but that's in my abilities, but I don't think it'd be appropriate. So no. Yeah. And it dies. The crystalline entity explodes and it looks a lot like the Death Star when it explodes, lots of sparks shooting everywhere and stuff.
Yeah.
And finally, Picard is like, escort her to her quarters and do not leave her unattended. And Data goes with her.
What harm could she do now, though? I'm just saying.
The thing is gone. It's dead. Yeah, now she feels like she's at peace.
And the way she walks with Data, did you notice how she kept holding his hand and like cuddling with him?
Gross. It was just gross.
As she walked off to the turbo lift, she had the biggest smile on her face. Like it was just a warm, sunny day. The world, all was right with the world. I mean, she was just like on cloud nine as she walked off the bridge while everyone stared at her with their mouths open.
Yes.
Like, what did you just do?
Killed a life form.
And I also thought to myself, as far as we know, this is the only crystalline entity we've encountered. But what if there are others and they're super pissed that you just killed one of them? Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
But she didn't care about any
coordinates of Dr. Marr to the new crystalline entities and just get the hell out of there. You're on your own, lady. Go ahead. You can't take them all down at once. There's like 100 coming for you. Anyway. Yeah, she keeps doing this, like holding his hand and trying to snuggle like in his like shoulder. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? Stop. And she goes, do you think that Rennie would be pleased that like now he can like rest peacefully? And I love that Data in the most perfect Data way says, no, after like reviewing everything that I know of your son, he would be really sad about what you've done. Like he took such pride in your scientific accomplishments and now you've just destroyed all of it. Like your career is over because of this. And he would be really sad right now that you killed this like life form.
Yeah, so, and you just see her face, like, fall. Yeah. Oh, it was so painful.
And there's no takebacks. As in the real world, there are no takebacks for something that big. You can't take it back.
That comes back to and that comes back to the question of justice versus vengeance. Like that's exactly it. And I actually think about this all the time whenever there's some heinous crime, and I watch a lot of crime TV. I think I've mentioned before in the show, like I love crime dramas because I'm always like, because they always have a sense of justice. They wrap it up at the end within 45 minutes. We've caught the bad guy. All is well. Every once in a while, the bad guy escapes, but we find him in the next episode. Right. So it's like, unlike the real world, there's always some nice little wrap up. But I often think about justice versus vengeance and how different those things are, because I feel like no matter what you do, you can never bring back that person, right? Destroying the crystalline entity didn't bring Rennie back. Couldn't bring Rennie back. And could it make you feel better? Maybe. Like maybe for a little bit. I think she felt better all the way back to her quarters. All those, however many minutes it took for her to get there. For 3 minutes, she felt amazing. And then now her whole entire career is over. She's probably going to be court-martialed or whatever the heck the punishment system is for her actions of killing a life form in cold blood with like a million witnesses. You can't even pretend like you didn't do it. Like now your whole life is over. It's kind of like, if someone kills a loved one and then you go and kill that person for quote unquote justice. And so your loved one can quote unquote rest. Well, now you're in jail for the rest of your life for what you did because you took someone else's loved one. And it just kind of keeps going.
Because that's what justice is. That's justice, not the killing of the first person, the second person having to serve like time for what they did. It goes back to the quintessential, like 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I'm reliving a lot of that right now because with my nephews staying with me for the summer, like it's a lot of like, well, he did this, well, he did that, well, he put me with, and it was like, nope, we're not doing all that. And why did you hit your brother? Well, he hit me first. Well, 2 wrongs don't make a right. You can't justify that. Like you just can't justify that because you didn't like what somebody did. So,
it's a hard thing.
Yeah. And like, I think the key difference here is the crystalline entity did not murder your son. It ate the planet that your son happened to be on, and he was collateral damage.
Right.
You went out and purposely murdered this thing.
I guess
that's alive.
That's
true. So it's like that makes her
that makes her a murderer, and him, like not him, and the crystalline entity was just eating, but she actually murdered something.
Yeah. And that episode is really sad. It's really sad. And like, it's so sad for her because now she has to live with that for the rest of her life. And her life now has no more purpose. She's destroyed the crystalline entity. She's done the thing she set out to do, but now it's done. And all this time later finds out that like Rennie never wanted that anyway. So it's like, wow, and that really sucks.
I wonder if, because, like I said, when people serve time for stuff that they've done that's horrible, like murder, it doesn't feel to me like that's enough, but also killing them doesn't feel like enough, because what I want is for that person to be back. And that's not an option. Yes. So I feel like, well, then what's the option? Because I want that. That's the option I want. That's the only one that to me feels like enough. And thinking about this scenario, I wonder if she would have decided not to kill the crystalline entity, but instead to communicate with it and figure out its origins and all that stuff, if that could have actually given her second life. Because her whole life was about revenge and killing the entity. But now, as you said, it's dead. And now she has no purpose or meaning for her whole life. Her whole life's meaning is gone because not only she's already accomplished the one thing she set out to do, and she's lost the illusion that her son would be proud or happy or at rest because of her actions. But had she taken a different choice, she could have still been the foremost expert in this entity. And it could have given her life a whole new purpose. Now I know about these entities. Now I know what they're doing and where they're from. And now we have this other food source, so they can't destroy us anymore. And, this first entity, I'm going to call him Rennie in honor of my son and what he, this could have given her life a whole new, fresh wave of meaning that was positive and impactful and impacted the whole species of crystalline entities and every other species that they would have eaten. Like, it could have been amazing. And instead it was just really sad.
I totally agree with you. She could have had like a whole new career as an extension of the career that she already has. Right. And like, it could have been really beautiful, and Rennie would have still been so proud of her. Right. It's very rare to find stories like this, but I do remember reading a story of a woman whose son was murdered by this other kid. And it was some like stupid, like a bar fight that got out of control, or I don't know, something really stupid like this. And like her son died so pointlessly. And the woman actually made it a point to like forgive that man who like murdered her son. I think they were close to the same age. And she basically like adopted him almost like a surrogate son, because that boy was like so lost in his life that this is like the choices that he had turned to, and like forgave him and like gave him the chance at like a new life with like a family who loved him and like all this stuff, like, which is like, that takes some superhuman ability right there.
That's amazing
ability. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Really,
like,
really amazing.
I can't imagine that. Like I said, I want the person to have not died. That's what I want.
Yes.
That's the only outcome I want. And that's like the only outcome you can't have.
Exactly.
Which is what makes these kinds of questions and situations very complicated and frustrating. And it's why I totally understand what Dr. Marr did. I wish he would have not killed it, because I think it was, as you put it, like such a singular individual, and so much was lost in the losing of this entity. However, I totally understand why she did it. This has been her whole life's mission. And it's just unfortunate.
I'm going to find it and destroy it because I killed my son. Sure.
And it's unfortunate that at the end she realizes that was a horrible mistake.
Yeah. So my final thoughts on this episode is that it was a sad episode on so many levels, but very, very well done. I like that we got the where are they now for the crystalline entity. And we got a second sort of story out of it. A couple of things to note. Picard is still wearing his super cool red suede jacket, but it did, I don't know if you noticed this, but it got a touch of an update on Darmok, on the episode Darmok. It had these like very heavy rubber shoulders. But they swapped those out and it looks like the shoulders are just black suede now. Which I thought was pretty cool, because the rubber shoulders were like really heavy looking and like really thick and kind of clumsy looking. So they updated that a little bit. Just as a side note, this episode was inspired by the novel Moby Dick, with the crystalline entity being seen as like the white whale, like this destroyer, which I thought was like really kind of interesting. Guys, next week we are talking season 5, episode 5, Disaster. Thank you so much for nerding out and hanging in there with us, and we will see you next week.
Bye. Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.